Hi, I'm Josh and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be reviewing The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is an icon in English literature. She has won a Nobel Peace Prize and I believe a Pulitzer Prize for another novel. She's an author that I first became aware of in high school when my high school lit teacher showed us the film Beloved. And at the time, I had trouble getting into and understanding the film. I have yet to read Beloved, however I would like to, but I finally got around to reading my first novel by Toni Morrison this month, and I am so glad that I did. I will admit, as I said in my February TBR, that I approached this with some trepidation, which is to say, I was worried that I wouldn't have the cognitive abilities to appreciate what's going on in this story. Well, it's not untrue that I did struggle a bit, especially when I started this book. I was able to follow along and figure out what was going on well enough. I did use a few aids on the internet, which is to say, I stopped midpoint and I looked in to figure out exactly just the basic structure and who the characters are, so I could recognize who the names are and who we're talking about. When we first started, I thought we were having the point of view of the main character, who is a young black girl who has a serious problem with her black identity, where she thinks she's just really ugly, not just because she's black, but because she comes from a family of people who have been considered very ugly in their community. Add on to that the racism and stigma that comes with being black, and you have this young girl who just feels ashamed to be who she is and to be proud of who she is, and so she envies the blue eyes of other girls, and that is sort of where the name comes from. It's just desire to have the bluest eyes. Now, I ended up rereading this book the next day after I finished it. I actually read it in one day because it's very short, by listening to one version of the audiobook, and then I reread it again with a different version of the audiobook, which was a newer version read by Toni Morrison, which I actually appreciated that one better. I don't normally like audiobooks narrated by the author because when I listen to an audiobook, it usually is for the experience, and I find that most authors aren't professional performers. Now this was, I felt like, one of those special cases where the book we're trying to read is much more than just a entertainment experience. We're not just seeking to be entertained. It is an educational experience. And there's something about being able to hear her articulate and pronunciate everything that's going on in the story that gives it a level of emotional connection that you might not otherwise get. And so I really enjoyed listening to that. And I will also say that after finishing it the first time and having that little bit of review that I did online to really make sure that I understood, one, that these are the characters we're talking about. This is their basic relationships that I struggled a bit with. And then this is the structure of the narrative structure, where you jump from different perspectives, different timelines, and from first person to third person. That really threw me. I thought we were getting a first person view of the main character. It turns out it wasn't that, nor was it even constantly just that first person perspective. And you can imagine how that might be somewhat off-putting, or not off-putting, but somewhat confusing. And I'm really glad that I made the decision to reread it, because after having that base understanding from reading it the first time, mixed with the extra knowledge, I was able to really follow along in a way that I wasn't able to the first time, and appreciate it much more. I would say that in rereading it, it went from being a 3.5, maybe a 4, to a 4.5, a solid 4.5 star book, because it is not only just a well-written story, it's also one that touches on such a very important topic, as is common for a lot of Toni Morrison's books. This book is a commentary on the harm that racism does, and the harm that self-hatred can do, not just to yourself, but when you have black folks who are trying to demean other black folks, or one minority trying to demean another minority to try and fit in. When in reality, when you're dealing with racist people, with this idea of white supremacy, you're never going to be on the same grounding. So you have to stand up. We have to stand up against it together. I recognize I'm not a minority, which in a way it means I have an added responsibility to speak up against racism. Just even though this was published, say, in 1970, I think this is still such a present topic. We think about all of the issues in the news, from the young man in high school who wasn't able to graduate, or they tried to keep from graduating because he wanted to wear dreads during the graduation. The fact that that still remains today, that they can try and basically censor and control him and exclude him because he's dressing in a way that is not considered normal by their standards. That is where you get this idea of self-hatred, as if there's something wrong with the way you look. And in reality, all it is that it's different than what is considered the norm, and so they find ways of trying to excuse and limit that. This is just racism evolving to the new age, white supremacy trying to survive out, trying to find new ways of limiting other races in ways that aren't as explicit. But with the slightest bit of investigation, it is shown to be what it truly is. This is a very dark novel, because what we're seeing here is not just the slow decay of this young girl's mental health, but we also get a picture into her parents and the childhood that they had, and how their experiences of poverty and racism has sort of led them to becoming the type of parents that they are, which partly fuels the mentality that this young girl has towards herself. I chose to do this solo review because, one, I felt like I was very proud of the fact that I was able to understand this, even if I had to get aid, but also because it is such a poignant novel about the danger and the harm of racism, and the need to take pride in who you are and be proud of yourself and where you come from, and the differences that you have with other people, and realize that you are your own type of beauty. Everyone is beautiful. Or rather, recognizing the beauty in everyone, even if other people don't do that, don't recognize it. So it's a little bit more background about the book. This is based during the Great Depression period, or around that time. So it is a sort of historical novel, even though it was written in the 1970s. However, I didn't find the setting to be as significant in what was going on here, meaning while it does contribute to the poverty and to the level of racism back in that time, I found the narrative and the story to be all too modern. The story and the narrative that we explore here is still very modern in its topics, in a way that I think is definitely worth reading, in a way that will hopefully still engage the reader, even if you don't consider yourself someone who traditionally likes historical fiction. This is the kind of novel that I intentionally chose to read, despite the fact that I was worried I wouldn't like it or even be able to comprehend it, because I recognize its significance as an educational literate work of fiction and in Black history. So I highly recommend that you try and give this a shot. If you need to, I don't think there's any shame in finding study aids online, because I feel like there's plenty of beauty and knowledge to be learned from this, even in that situation. And I'm very glad that I read it. I'm even more glad that I decided to drop everything in my TBR and give this another read right away. Not just because I enjoyed it more that way, but also because I was able to really use everything I had learned for a more complete experience. I highly recommend this book. 4.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you, and have a good day.